One of the things that in the Obama administration everybody said was going to be impossible to fix. I realize it is totally typical to break this kind of news late on a Friday night, but it can't be avoided. And it is potentially really important. It's about the very first thing that President Obama did when he became president in 2009. His first official act as president was to sign a directive ordering that the offshore prison we've been maintaining in communist Cuba should be shut down. He said it should be shut down within a year. There was a second part to that order, though. The president also ordered at the same time that there be a review of every case of every prisoner at that prison to determine what should happen to them. Should they be prosecuted? Should they be set free? Should they be sent home, but sent home to prison? Should they just be held on to without trial for a while longer while we tried to pretend they weren't there and didn't explain to anybody why the prison needed to be in Cuba? Those reviews for every prisoner, those were all ordered by the president at the same time as part of that very first thing that he did as a new president. And it's interesting, since he has been president, not a single new person has been sent to that prison that we keep in Cuba. There have been no additional prisoners added. But obviously we have not closed it yet either. There were 242 people held in prison there when President Obama took office. There are now 166 men there. Only 9 of the 166 have been charged or convicted of any crime. The rest are in this limbo that the administration really says it wants to end. Of all the guys who are left there, most of them are from one country. When we first opened up this prison in Cuba and started sending guys there, a ton of them were from Afghanistan, from Saudi Arabia, but almost all of those folks are gone now. Not all of them, but almost all of them are. The ones who are left are numerically mostly from this place. There's 166 guys at Guantanamo, and 88 of them are from the nation of Yemen. Of those 88 guys, 59 of them have been cleared by that review process to go home. Just like the Saudis did, and just like the Afghans did, and most of all the other people from all the other countries that were heavily represented at this prison, these guys from Yemen, most of them were cleared. They were set to start going home in December 2009. Until a guy with ties to al-Qaeda in Yemen tried to bomb an American plane with a bomb stuffed in his underpants at Christmas time 2009. That put a hold on the plans to send prisoners home to Yemen. And that eventually led to congressional de facto bans on the U.S. government sending anyone to Yemen from Guantanamo. And so there has been this intractable problem of something that President Obama wanted to get done. He wanted to close this prison, but he has been stuck with this prison that Congress won't let him close. He's stuck with a roster of mostly Yemeni prisoners who are mostly cleared to be released, but he is blocked from releasing them. And now a majority of the prisoners at Guantanamo are refusing food and hunger striking because they think there is no end to any of it. But we now know, at least we can maybe know enough to imagine how this might end, at least how some of it might end. When Attorney General Eric Holder walked into the hearing where he testified for 4 solid hours this week on Scandal Rama, as the Attorney General was walking into that hearing room, a protester yelled at him.
Mr. Attorney General, when are you going to appoint a special envoy to Guantanamo? 29 people are now being forced.
Mr. Attorney General, when are you going to appoint a special envoy to Guantanamo? The Attorney General did not answer. They never do. The protester was eventually thrown out. But then, during the hearing, the Attorney General did say this.
There are steps that the administration can do and that we will do in an attempt to close that facility. There's a substantial number of people who can, for instance, be moved back to Yemen. The president put a hold on that given the situation that we had in Yemen at the time. I think that is something that we have to review. I think the president has indicated that we will be taking renewed action in that regard.
Attorney General there saying when taking renewed action in that regard. He's not talking specifically about taking renewed action about sending people to Yemen, but he did raise sending people to Yemen as part of something that they are looking at doing maybe soon. The LA Times has since pulled that thread from that commentary and is positing that the fact that there is a new government in Yemen now might be what is making this previously undoable thing suddenly maybe doable. Quote, of the 86 prisoners approved by a presidential task force 4 years ago for transfer out of Guantanamo, 59 are Yemenis, and, this is the important part, their new government wants them back. Citing the emergence of a more collaborative leadership under Yemen's new president, the country's officials have been lobbying Washington to return their countrymen. So we don't necessarily want them. They desperately want them. They have been cleared for release. Anybody else sensing that something might be conceivably about to happen here? Joining us now is Gregory Johnson. He's the author of The Last Refuge, Yemen, Al-Qaeda, and America's War in Arabia. He's a Near East Studies scholar at Princeton University. Gregory Johnson, thanks very much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Why would the new government in Yemen want these guys back?
Well, the old government wanted them back. Ali Abdullah Saleh wanted them back. But Ali Abdullah Saleh, the former president, the dictator of Yemen, in power for more than 3 decades, he knew how important closing Guantanamo Bay was to President Obama, and he played politics with it. He essentially held the prisoners ransom a second time, trying to get as much from the Obama administration as he possibly could. The new government, President Abdurabu Mansour Hadi in Yemen, has very little domestic base of support. So what he needs is a lot of international support, particularly from the United States, to offset his lack of domestic support. So what he's doing is essentially being a very flexible partner, willing to take these off President Obama's hands.
Is he doing a good job at this diplomacy? Is he asking for the right things and making his offers the right way?
Well, that's a very interesting point, because just last week, Yemen's Minister for Human Rights, Hurriya Mashur, showed up in Washington thinking that she was going to lobby for the release of these 59 individuals. Her trip was scheduled to be 10 days long. She left after 3 days. She didn't get the meeting she thought she was going to get. She was very upset with the reaction from the Americans. She was very upset with how her own embassy staffed her, and she left Washington in a huff.
Wow. Does that mean that there is a bigger hurdle to this than we thought there might be based on the calculations on paper?
Well, it's Guantanamo Bay. There's always a bigger hurdle. This is something that President Obama has been saying from day 2, and from the first week. This is when AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the same week that President Obama signed the legislation saying he was going to close Guantanamo, this new group shows up with 2 former Guantanamo Bay detainees. He tries again at the end of the year. There's the underwear bomber. Every time the president makes a move on this, something from Yemen comes up, trips him up.
In terms of the objections to sending, whether or not it is safe to send former Guantanamo prisoners who have been cleared for release in terms of their raw assessment of dangerousness, however they do that, in terms of assessing whether or not it is safe to send them to a place like Yemen, can this government, or could the previous government, make any meaningful assurances about that? Does any of it strike you as substantive, or is it all just politics?
Well, a lot of it is politics, and mostly this has to do with trust, right? The Bush administration sent people back to Saudi Arabia because it trusted the Saudi government, sent people back to Afghanistan because it trusted, in sort of a way, what the Afghan government was. There hasn't been that same amount of trust in Yemen. And the real irony is that the group in Yemen, Al-Qaeda, the group responsible for these underwear bombs, these cartridge bombs, that group has former Guantanamo Bay detainees in it. But they're not Yemenis, they're Saudis.
And why did they end up going to Yemen in order to be operational?
Right.
Because they had room to maneuver them.
Absolutely correct.
Is there anything that you foresee in terms of how much operational room to move a group like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has there? Is there any chance that there's going to be meaningful pressure on them from the domestic government? Will it all be imposed from outside by U.S. JSOC and CIA military efforts?
That's a very good question. I mean, right now, the group is under a lot of pressure, but most of it comes from drones, most of it comes from airstrikes. But the Yemeni government right now, we have to remember the Arab Spring that overthrew President Ali Abdullah Saleh. In Tunisia, Ben Ali went into exile. In Egypt, Mubarak goes to prison. And in Libya, Gaddafi is killed. In Yemen, it's a different situation. Ali Abdullah Saleh didn't lose. He just stepped down from being the president. He's still a political figure. And so there's all of these tensions, there's these behind-the-scenes maneuvering between these different factions, and the Yemeni government doesn't have complete control over large portions of the country there right now.
Gregory, I know that you are a Yemen expert. You are not necessarily a Guantanamo expert, but if something was able to be worked out and these 59 guys were shipped from Cuba to home to Yemen, like the Yemeni government is arguing for, do you think that would essentially be the key to closing Guantanamo?
It would be, I think, a large step towards closing Guantanamo. But I think there's a deeper issue here, a bigger issue, and that is keeping people indefinitely detained outside the legal framework. And so President Obama is very clear that he wants to close Guantanamo Bay, but at the same time, his administration appears to want to continue to indefinitely detain many members outside of any sort of a legal framework. And so you can sort of get away with the rhetorical value of closing Guantanamo Bay while keeping the policies that underlie it in place. And I think that's the real issue.
They say they only want it for a very small number of people people, but if you've got extrajudicial detention, you've got it. It's kind of like being a little pregnant.
It's either or, yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
Gregory Johnson, it's great to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've been following you from afar for a long time. It's nice to have you here. Okay. All right.